Hello, welcome to Tom Benty Media Video Podcast, episode number 10. I'm here with distinguished guest Roman Prokopchuk, digital marketer. Also, he has his own video podcast, his own podcast called The Digital Savage Experience, and it's getting a lot of attention, a lot of listens. He has a lot of cool guests on that show. So Roman's here to talk about digital marketing, what's going on currently in the world of digital marketing, and how he started his podcast and how he was able to build such a great following. So Roman, welcome. Thanks for coming up here to Edison, New Jersey to be a part of this video podcast. And why don't we talk a little bit about first how you got into digital marketing?
All right, yeah. So I went to school for criminal justice, and I graduated in 2008 when the economy tanked. So at that point, all state, local, and federal agencies kind of froze hiring, and then I was kind of down and depressed. So the only thing that really kept me sane was going to the gym daily, whatever, every few times a week. And I met someone at the gym that knew my circumstances in terms of looking for a job. And then he said, come out to my, car, which was kind of sketchy. It's like, let's sell something or whatever. But they handed me a packet about search engine optimization. And they basically said, take 1 to 2 months, learn this, read up on the internet, and, come on board and do some search engine optimization and some digital marketing.
Now, at this point in 2008, was search engine optimization, optimizing your websites on Google searches, was that really like a very new thing?
It wasn't a new thing, but it was like the Wild West. So like ranking for top terms and getting a lot of traffic and manipulating search engines was a lot easier. A few years later, Google started rolling out a lot of algorithm updates and a lot of penalties that kind of rooted out those bad things in terms of spammy content, bad links, that kind of stuff.
All right, cool. So I guess you took that job with the guy from the gym who met you out in the parking lot. Is that correct?
Yep, I did that for about a month or two. And after which I put my resume online and kind of got picked up by a company called LexisNexis. And I was there for 4 years, handling kind of their elite legal clients in terms of search engine optimization, social media, content strategy. And I worked on a few hundred campaigns there.
Cool. So when you talk about search engine optimization, what exactly did you do? Can you give us just, for the people that really are a little unsure about search engine optimization, can you tell us not only what it is, but what you do and how you became so good at it?
So currently there's about a few hundred basically ranking factors for you to rank in terms of favorably on search engine results pages on Google, Bing, Yahoo. Those things have to do with on-site, so the content you have on, different things in terms of tags, that kind of stuff. Off-site, which is links pointing back to your site, basically building authority and trust. So you have authoritative sites linking back to you that kind of vouch for you. It's kind of like a trust factor. And then technical things, the way your website is built, how it can be crawled, is it mobile friendly, and factors like that. And now in 2019, there's other artificial kind of intelligence factors there's one thing called RankBrain that takes machine learning into play. And at this point, it wasn't back in 2008, 2009, but now there's a personalization effect. So you're getting results tailored to you, so it's a lot harder to rank for broader terms because Google's trying to present unique results per person, especially when a lot of users are actually logged in when they're doing searches.
Cool. So for people that are wanting to start their own business or have their own business and they want to be seen on Google and they want to be optimized, what could they do? What are some best practices that they can do to really increase their search engine optimization?
Well, one, have a website. There's still people in 2019 that don't have a website.
Craziness.
Yeah, if they do have a website, make sure it's mobile friendly because Google moved over to a mobile first index, meaning those pages that are mobile friendly are being ranked and indexed before they had a desktop version in terms of their primary indexation, and they moved over to mobile. Other than that, just understanding your brand and the differentiation of your brand. So positioning your brand, what you do, how you do it, and then understanding what people are actually searching for, and understand your target audience, where they are, in terms of incorporating content, local content. If you're a local business, understand things going on around you, how you can help those around you and other businesses, and mentioning that within the content and content strategy. and then having yourself, seen and linked to. So stuff like social media is connected too. So if you have a website, usually someone will go a few, 5, 6, 7 different steps in order to call you or buy your product or service. So even if you're not active on social media, have a social media account linking back to your website. Have your Google local optimized, because that's important when somebody's looking for a local business, to understand where you are. If you do have reviews, encourage your customers, if you obviously do deliver a good product or service, to leave you favorable if obviously, I'm not saying scam or if you had a bad experience, put a 5-star review anyway. But if you had a good experience, highlight that, because obviously you're adding trust in that sense as well.
Cool. Aside from search engine optimization, what are some other ways that local businesses, even entrepreneurs, how can they use digital marketing to their advantage? How can they gain new customers through digital marketing, in your experience?
Yeah, well, like with digital, you can be the best thing or best person at what you do. If nobody knows about it, what does it matter? You can be having a Nobel Peace Prize. Well, with that, obviously, I guess there's publicity, but you may be the best local baker in the state, but if you have nothing, online that demonstrates that, or nobody can find that information, we're not like back in the day where, things are in a newspaper or a magazine. You have to have a strong online presence in order for people to find you and understand what you're about and what differentiates you from your competition. So social media, obviously, be on the relevant social media platforms that your customers are on to highlight kind of that, brand focus. And social media is great for highlighting the personal side of your brand, stuff you do within a community, how you give back, your employees, what makes you different. So your website does that to a certain extent and explains things from maybe a technical or informational approach as well, but your social media should really show who you are as a company, your people, your business. And if you do have some funds for paid marketing, if you're a small business, paid search may not be the best in terms of ROI because of the cost. So try stuff like on LinkedIn if it's B2B, sponsor content, native content, boost posts on Facebook. Try Twitter. Obviously it's a different platform in terms of life of the actual posts, but play around with paid social a little bit because it's still on the cheap end. And if you're doing stuff and you do have a viable video, I think that's important, having a cornerstone video that really highlights your brand and what you're about, and promote that as well, because a lot of video advertising is still fairly cheap as well.
Cool. And in your experience, what do you think works the best? Does it really all depend on your particular business model, or is there one platform, like does Facebook marketing work better than Instagram marketing or Twitter marketing? In your experience and your expertise, what do you think is the best one, the best bang for your buck?
Well, it depends on your target audience, and depends what industries you're targeting and what industry you're in. So obviously, if you're B2B and looking for more professional business, LinkedIn obviously may be the right path for you from a organic and a paid perspective. If you're reaching a specific demographic on Facebook, Facebook obviously owns Instagram at this point, so you can run the ads in unison. Instagram tends to be a lot cheaper, so stuff like story ads get a lot of engagement. Those are still fairly cheap. So it all depends on what you're looking for and really understanding your target audience and what you're hoping to achieve. So obviously, if you have the funds, I would encourage you to test on the platform. Go where you think and your target audience is, and if you have like outside funds, test other platforms that may surprise you as well.
And in terms of the expectations, what is considered a good Facebook campaign? Like what type of interactions, what type of return on investment is considered a good either Facebook or Instagram or Twitter? Like what are some good results that people can strive for on those platforms?
Usually ROI in terms of engagement rates, or like a conversion. Well, let's talk about conversion rates. They're usually in the single digits. Obviously, double-digit conversions and everything else are like the top of the top. But if you're doing something like paid search, usually it's low single digits. Is somewhat favorable. With other things, it's depending how much you spend and who you're targeting. If you're just simply blanketing without any like criteria that really hones in on your target audience, you're going to spend a lot of money and not get anything out of it. If it's super concentrated, you're going to get a better result.
Cool. Cool. So, going back to what we said, you also have a podcast called the Digital Savage Experience.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about that podcast, how it started, what are types of the guests that come onto the show, and also I think it's interesting in today's world how all marketing is intertwined. So even though your podcast doesn't really deal with what you're doing in your digital marketing company like in a very specific way, it's still related. And can you talk a little bit about how marketing is changing and how branding is so more diversified now than it was just maybe 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, so content is only consumed in a certain amount of ways right now in terms of the internet. So you have written word, you have images, you have video, and you have audio. So with the audio play, we've seen in several, years, I would say last 5 years, year over year, the podcast space has been growing in terms of audio content.
It seems like everybody has their own podcast.
Everybody has their own podcast. You see a lot of movie stars, comedians, stuff like that jumping into it. Like Mike Tyson has a podcast, which is hilarious. Other shows that are spinning off, like Ron Burgundy, Will Ferrell. There's a Ron Burgundy podcast on iHeartRadio. I actually recently attended Podcast Movement, the biggest podcast conference in Orlando in August. And basically, it was interesting seeing like Hollywood is experimenting with podcasts. They're testing out scripts and ideas through podcast form, and if they really resonate, then they'll develop it into a movie. So it's like
how do they test it out on a podcast?
So there's a lot of true crime and nonfiction podcasts. So like a lot of authors will kind of write and put that content out where it's like telling a story. I mean, I guess it's somewhat of a like an audio book, but not really. Some things are in that format, so they'll take a script and turn it into kind of like an audio drama. Like back in the day, before it was TV, it was radio. So you had radio shows or, radio drama. So it's kind of like that. And if there's a lot of engagement, they'll move over and move it into a movie. Okay, so like that's something that was discussed, which is very interesting. But my podcast, I always wanted to do a podcast ever since I don't want to be cliche, but Joe Rogan's podcast back in the day, I mean, he's kind of like...
When did that start? Because I've just gotten into that within the last year or so.
Yeah, he's hilarious. But I mean, since 2013, I don't know when he exactly started it, but that's when I kind of started listening to it. And it's one of those things where you need to take, a jump into doing something regardless of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Just try it. And if you succeed, you succeed. If you don't, you don't. So learning on how to start a podcast, equipment you need, how to syndicate it or push it to platforms. And to begin with, it was just mainly me sharing digital marketing advice, so real tactical stuff like this is the strategy, this is how you should do it, my opinions on different things in the industry, and then stuff I'm dealing with in terms of me being a foster parent and some of the stuff I'm facing with that. And then March of this year, I switched over to an interview format. So since then, I've interviewed about 75 founders, CEOs, athletes, authors, all kinds of people that are kind of winning, I guess, or have gotten to a successful point to where they are now and learning from their journey. So learning where they started, some of the stuff they had to overcome, and how they got successful and what you can recommend for the audience in terms of maybe avoiding some of those pitfalls and getting to where they are now. So if you want to obviously be a successful digital marketer or athlete or an author, what are the steps to get them there? What motivates those people, and kind of tying all those in terms of adding value to the audience.
And that's really cool. Now, how has your podcast increased your brand as a digital marketer?
Well, I also try to co-promote the podcast and my experiences and knowledge through being on other podcasts. I mean, we're talking now. So basically promoting what I do and actually adding value to wherever I speak or whatever I do in terms of an appearance. And then at the end, possibly making the relationship. But every person that's on as a guest, it's a networking opportunity. You can lean on that person in the future. That person knows what you're about. They can recommend other guests for you. When the episode comes out, they're more than happy to co-promote it, which increases your audience. And just basically building relationships, even though there's different reasons to do a podcast, like monetizing it and having a full-time job. Mm-hmm. For me, it's more like passion and learning about people's stories and kind of building a network of people indirectly without even leaving my house or leaving a studio, because over time there's hundreds and hundreds of people that you meet around the world that you may have not normally met, and you leave an impression on them and they leave an impression on you. So you also, in terms of like networking, there's a lot of small talk when you meet somebody at a conference or like a happy hour.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really get into like the meat and bones of the conversation. With a podcast interview, if you ask the right questions and learn the right things, you really get to know a person in a short amount of time.
Very cool. Very cool. In terms of your podcast, who are some of the guests that you have coming on in the future, and how do you go about booking guests? How do like people find out about being a part of your show, and how does that process work?
Well, you can reach out to the podcast email. I think it's digitalsavageexperience.podcast@novazoradigital.com, which is a mouthful. But you can find the podcast on any social media platform as well, on any platform in terms of iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio. At this point, I kind of gain momentum, so there's a lot of people booked in terms of agency owners, authors, brain health specialists, people just trying to give you an edge in how they actually got to where they are now. A lot of people like myself didn't start in the career that I'm in currently. So, why they pivoted, when they pivoted, what made that first step, what made them avoid kind of that initial fear, and what they learned from it. And at this point, I have a lot of people reaching out to me. At this point also, it's a big business to have booking agencies, kind of like PR agencies, specifically for speakers that want to appear on podcasts in terms of interviews, and a lot of authors as well. So there's a lot of companies out there that book authors to do like a press tour before their launch. So I'm getting a lot of authors that do a lot of things and are founders of a lot of companies as well. So I have people on LinkedIn reaching out to me. So like I'm fortunate enough at this point that I kind of gain momentum, and I have more content and more booked interviews that I kind of know what to do with.
Cool. I mean, I think what's great about the podcast is that there really is no format per se. It's just, like you said, you have authors, you have people involved in brain chemistry, and all different types of individuals with no specific kind of like one type of occupation that's coming onto the show. And I think that's really cool, and I think that relates to what's going on in media now, is how everything is blended, and what's interesting is that you can bring your perspective to the show. So you might not be a doctor, but you can talk to somebody about brain chemistry, because other people that aren't involved in medicine have an interest in that. And when you talk, we were just talking about Joe Rogan's show. I mean, he has all different types of individuals there, from neuroscientists to MMA fighters to comedians to actors, etc. And he just brings his perspective. And that's what's interesting, is that with the podcast, no really set format per se. It's just two people talking, two people gaining insight of what their perspective is, what's their worldview, what's their point of view. And that's why they're successful, is because of that lack of format, because for generations and generations we were accustomed to a very specific type of show, and everything, it's either a science show or it's an entertainment show, and now it's all blended, it's all the same, really. It's all about our interest level and what resonates with us on an emotional and intellectual level. So that's really cool, and that's what you're doing with your show as well.
Yeah, I mean, and you can have it. There's also like super focused shows that make money. When I was at the podcast conference, there's a guy that has a show solely about raising ferrets, and there's no other podcast out there. So he's the only source for these people that, are enthusiasts, and he makes a lot of money with advertising because he's the only one in that space. So you can still be in a niche. I try to follow a format in terms of questions, but then just for the show not to get crazy, you know what I mean? Just kind of reel it in, but still ask follow-up questions. And the good thing, like you said, also with the guest, you're learning from that conversation. So you're like connecting the dots for yourself and like adding to that conversation from your perspective as a host as well.
Cool. And where can people find your podcast once again?
You can go Digital Savage Experience on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, or some of the main ones. If you Google it, you're going to get all the platforms. I have wave.com, Digital Savage Experience, and the formal website is under production. But in terms of all the consumption platforms, it's posted everywhere. All the episodes are on YouTube as well if you prefer to listen that way. So anywhere you consume podcasts or audio content, my show is on.
And can you give the audience some insight in terms of if they have any, or just give them some advice in terms of how to start a podcast and how to promote a podcast.
Starting a podcast, get a cheap mic, USB mic. All you need is a laptop and USB mic. Sometimes you don't even need that.
How much does the mic cost generally?
I mean, you can get a reasonably, like a condenser mic for like $40 on the low end. That's somewhat decent. So a microphone, find a quiet room, or if you have a conference room, if you're a business, and then obviously if it grows, you can buy more equipment, have a laptop. You would need an audio editing program. Audacity is free. You can utilize that to edit your audio, make it a little bit more professional. Stuff like if you have two guests in two different locations, balance the volume of their voices so they match up.
Is that pretty user friendly? It's pretty easy to learn.
It's very easy to learn. There's a lot of tutorials on YouTube. A website, well, you don't need a website, but a laptop and platform like recording remotely. So if you're doing your interviews, people that aren't on location, either Skype or Zoom or something like that, and then if it's the free version, they usually store the episodes remotely to your computer. If you have the paid version, you can have it in the cloud. And if you are recording, I'd recommend recording separate tracks. Basically, it's easier for editing and avoid stuff like if somebody has a dog barking on their end remotely, and if you're on the same track and you're talking over that, it's almost impossible to move that or get that out at that point in time. But if it's on two separate tracks, you can isolate it on that person's. And a host, so Lisbon, Podbean, Anchor is free. If you put it on Anchor, like pros and cons to it, people say they control your content. They don't. They do make money sometimes off advertising your show. But that's free, and it syndicates out to some of the major platforms, so definitely check out Anchor. If you don't have a mic or even a laptop, you can literally record from your phone if you wanted to. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for audio quality, but I think in 2019 the barrier to entry, it's the lowest it's ever been. And in terms of spending some money, $20-$30 a month for hosting and some other stuff that's a reoccurring fee can really go a long way.
And you're promoting those links for your podcast on all your social media platforms?
Social, I have people that the guests themselves, I provide like a launch kit with all the digital assets and where it can be found. So they promote as you see fit. I don't necessarily say you have to do it, but wherever they want to share it, I'm happy to. Sharing it in relevant promotion groups on Facebook, different professional things with large followings and active user groups on LinkedIn. So that's important. Like if you have the size of a group, that's cool, but you have to see how active the members are. If there's nobody active, you're not going to get a lot of attention or a lot of interaction for that. And other things, if you do have an email list to begin with, you can obviously blast your new episodes in a newsletter or have notifications. For social, make sure you have all your notifications, suggestions to your audience on, so every time you release a new episode, like if you have it on YouTube, they're notified and can watch it right away and get that kind of initial downloads, initial streams in the first day, week, month. But it takes a lot of time if you're doing it yourself. If you do have some extra funds, you can find some really good audio engineers and some social people for fairly cheap to outsource and automate some of the process. So all you really do is have to record, and then you get everything back and it goes out. So
cool. All right, Roman, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you coming on to the show today. So again, please check out Roman's podcast, The Digital Savage Experience, and feel free to reach out to him on social media.
Yep, thanks for having me on.
All right, thanks a lot. Take care.